Good afternoon, everyone. This is Joe Peterson. Today I'd like to talk about the fascinating magic text and tradition known as Almadel or Almandal. The following is based on a presentation I gave at the Leaping Laughter Lodge in Minneapolis on November 5th, 2022. I've re-recorded the audio, which was unusable, so unfortunately the comments and questions from the participants were lost. But please post comments and questions below. I'd love to hear from you. Almandal and Almadel are closely related early Solomonic magic texts. The Almandal itself is a kind of portable altar used for consecrating magical objects and communicating with supernatural beings. A version was included in the popular collection of texts known as the Lemegeton, or Little Key of Solomon, but much of the material found in the earlier Latin manuscript is missing there. I'll take a look at the major known versions, their fluidity, origins in Sanskrit and Indo-Iranian mandala practice, Greek and Arabic elements and methods. I especially want to illustrate the fluidity and creativity widely employed in this literature. One of the magic texts I studied at the British Library was the Little or Lesser Key of Solomon, also known as Lemegeton. Crowley had printed Book 1 and part of Book 2 based on Mather's papers, but omitted the rest. A.E. Waite gave an abbreviated account and, as it turns out, defective. I found the fourth book, Almadel, the most intriguing part. Fast forward 50 years, Latin and German manuscripts have been identified, many by historian Lynn Thorndike, that are much fuller, more than 5 times longer. I'm sure there are many more that haven't reached my notice yet. One of the top researchers in these texts is Dr. Damaris Guerre, who wrote, "Research is still in its infancy." Julian Veronese published a critical edition of most of the Latin versions in 2012 with a valuable introduction and notes in French. Dr. Damaris Guerre published an article in 2013 which supplements Veronese's book in many ways. First, I should mention there are 2 main versions, which Veronese calls Almandal and Almadel, and Dr. Guerre designates Alpha and Beta. The Alpha version is closer to the theorized and lost Arabic and Greek ancestor and deals with jinns and shayatins. The Beta version seems to be reworked around an astrological or zodiacal framework and deals with angels. It's also known as Liber Intelligentiarum, or Book of the Intelligences. I'll talk about the differences more in a minute. Why is Almadel so interesting? First, the Lemegeton and Beta versions avoid the more dangerous chthonic or evil spirits. It deals exclusively with angels, hence no circle or elaborate defensive measures are needed. Second, the ritual is simpler than most magic texts, using a scrying table, candles, and incense. 3, it has connections to Indo-Iranian mandala practice. 4, its framework is astrological. 5, its emphasis is on ritual purity and preparation and pure intentions. 6, its practice is redemptive. And 7, it probably influenced John Dee's early experiments with spirit scrying. The illustration shown here is from the Cox 25 manuscript, showing the 4 candles with detents to hold up the mandal. The Almadel is thought to go back to Sanskrit or Indo-Iranian mandala traditions and practices. As you can see, not just the name Almandal, but the design and other elements correspond remarkably. Dr. Gudrun Buneman has a wonderful book on mandalas and yantras in the Hindu tradition, where she explains their uses there as a map of the cosmos, a focus of meditation or of worship or puja, and also for invoking spiritual beings into mandalas with the aid of mantras. They're also used in astrology and magic. Hindu mandalas are often prepared on copper or other durable materials, or on a pavilion adorned with banners, etc. Remarkably, all of these elements are found in the Solomonic Almadel. The Almadel texts refer to supernatural beings by various terms. The Alpha version manuscripts use the words jinns and shayatin, while the Beta version uses intelligences, heavenly spirits, and angels. HA1 refers to jinns, satans, demons, spirits, and winds, and the Greek term diaboli, or devils. The word jinn appears in the Vestal language as jaini, a class of evil spirits, notably in Yashts 10 and 19 and Vedevdat 21. It probably has Proto-Indo-European origins. Another Avestan or Zoroastrian reference to jinn is the name Spentas Dewa, described as a jinn of Solomon, son of David, on a magic bowl inscription. This is from Dennis Dooling's article Solomon, Exorcism, and the Son of David. Fairies have Zoroastrian equivalents to Peris in Persian and Parikas in the much older Avestan language. The Persian Rivayats have also references to jinns and fairies. The third conjuration in Ha1 refers to Diabolos in the air, water, fire, and earth. The use of the term jinn in the Alpha version text is not as sinister as might be implied by their Indo-Iranian origins. In later folk traditions, they are thought to be more kindly and giving. The jinns are described as corporeal, whereas the Shayatin are described as incorporeal. Here's a very rough timeline. You can see around 2,500 years separates the Rigvedic Sanskrit and Avesta texts from the Solomonic Almadel. The Jewish magic material is some 1,700 years later, with older elements. Sefer HaRazim, the incantation bowls, and the Sword of Moses identify 7 firmaments. The Solomonic Almadel texts are probably 12th or 13th century, possibly earlier. Notices of the Almadel may go back as early as references by William of Auvergne in 1230, although Dr. Gare maintains he was probably referring to the ritual altar itself, not the treatise. Trithemius mentioned the treatise Almadel in his 1509 Antipolis Maleficiorum. The incipit of his exemplar corresponds exactly with the Hallam manuscript Ha1 version, to use Dr. Gare's identification. His student Agrippa mentions it several times. Next, I'd like to talk a bit about the genealogy. This is, of course, a simplification, ignoring, for example, the German and Hebrew in translations, but captures some important elements. Version Alpha seems to have its origins in a section of the treatise called the Magica of Solomon, attested by Gonell but no longer extant. Veronese only included 2 Alpha version texts in his critical edition, which he designates F and F2, both from different Florence manuscripts. The F version is relatively self-contained with a simple ritual and requirements. It has obvious Greek and Arabic elements and lacks the zodiacal associations. Dr. Gare identified 2 additional texts, Ha1 in the Hallam manuscript and SSMG in the German translation of Gonell's Summa Sacra Magica. The connection with Raziel was proposed by Gare, but perhaps a little thin. The Ha1 text seems to be the least corrupted. Version F2 adds elements from the Book of Consecrations. Version Beta reworked the material, incorporating elements from the Vinculum Salomonis, Raziel, and Ars Notoria. This also illustrates well the adaptability and flexibility of most magical texts. Looking at the Alpha version, the 4 main texts differ significantly, and Ha1 and SSMG are the least corrupted. The Alpha version uses candles only when practicing at night. During the day, we're instructed to use banners or wands, in Latin vexilla, or almas, or ritual flagpoles, to use the Arabic term. Note the 4 gates or portae, typical of Hindu mandala practice. Along with the SSM German manuscript, the Greek ancestry of Ha1 manuscript is much more evident. Dr. Gare was able to reconstruct some of the Greek in her important 2013 paper, Gaudent Brevitatem Moderni. I will add a link to this paper below. In version Alpha, the mandal is used for consecration of ritual implements, Ha1 and F2, but not F, summoning spirits, and in a series of experiments, for example, for love, healing, defense, etc. Preparation in version Alpha includes cleanliness, found in F, F2, and Ha1. Version F2 also adds performances of the Mass and recitation of the 7 penitential psalms with litany and confession. F2 also adds a 9-day period of abstaining from sin and fasting on bread and water. Garments in F2 include a priestly alb, white, a stola, and a cincture. F2 also employs the use of holy water. These 3 variants of version Alpha all specify brass or red copper for the mandal, but the size varies somewhat. Candles are used for night operations, and virgae vel vexilla, which can be translated as wands or flags or banners, during the daylight hours. These are decorated with colored ribbons. A signet ring with engraved crystal stone is also employed, set in silver or gold, prepared on the day and hour of Mars. In Ha1, a hazel wand or sword is used to strike the mandal to force obedience. Vent holes in the table allow incense to pass through it, and the spirits will appear in the smoke. In Ha1, the version of the words engraved on the mandal, as well as the letters to engrave on the candles or vexillae, are different. Julian Veronese refers to this variability as an example of the, quote, plasticity of the onomastic forms. Ha1 and SSMG preserve older elements. The mandal was also known as the altar of consecration. To quote Dr. Gare, quote, in the course of the practice, the magician places objects, talismans, books, etc., on its surface in order to consecrate them, and thus invest them with the power to compel spirits, end quote. It uses the terms spirits or demons, winds, and diaboli. It also uses the words jinns and shayatin. According to Gunnell, it was integral to Book 5 of Solomon's Magica, and the separate treatise Almandal probably represents excerpts, narrowing the scope. You can see the vents for allowing smoke to flow through, 1 in the center and 8 at the ends of the spokes, and 4 holes in the corners for candles or banners. This drawing is not in the manuscript, but my straw man. Also note the gates referred to in the text as portai or yanuai. I already mentioned the signet ring, a sigil engraved in a crystal stone and set in a silver ring. Ha1 also uses Hebrew and Greek letters. The ritual in Ha1 includes holding a sword or wand and striking the almadel with it. Another characteristic of version alpha manuscripts is that they all compel the spirits by the archangel Michael. Here I show how the first exorcism varies in each manuscript. These are some of the experiments or operations given in Almandal version alpha, forcing obedience, love, discord, healing or causing sickness, and so on. Another unique version of the Almandal that I haven't mentioned yet was published by Vajra Reagan in 2018. Its emphasis on the consecration of stones may reflect the earlier emphasis found in the Magica of Solomon. It's difficult to fit this version into a stemma with the others. It's the oldest version known, but has been stripped of its Arabic and Hebrew elements and heavily Christianized. You can see it has many of the alpha design elements, a vent in the center, spokes, 8 more vents for suffumigation, and 4 gates dividing the perimeter into 12 segments. Moving on to version beta, this shows version beta altar design. My reconstruction is shown on the left. You can see the 6-angled seal of Solomon, with the gold signet in the center. The drawings given in the Lameghitan manuscripts are a bit corrupted. The drawing in the middle is from the Northwest University manuscript. It seems the Lameghitan version was based on a partial translation, which was then added to in order to make a more or less complete ritual. Only the first 2 altitudes are based on the Latin text. 2 more were added, but were not informed by the older texts. The version shown on the right is from Waite's Book of Ceremonial Magic. It's surprisingly defective. The version in Idries Shah's Secret Lore of Magic seems to be based on Waite, but with some attempted corrections not informed by the original manuscripts. Version beta is significantly different from version alpha. Here, the spirits are placed around a zodiacal framework, possibly drawn from Sefer HaRazim. There, the second heaven has 12 altitudes associated with zodiacal signs and directions. Names of the angels differ, however. Another very interesting example of version beta is found in Hebrew manuscript Genève 145. This is a bit later than our primary witnesses of version beta, early 1500s versus late 1400s, but shows interesting differences, including a pentagram-shaped signet and some slight variance in the divine names. This manuscript also contains the Sword of Moses and other texts, and was the basis for Jubal Harari's new translation of the sword. The Vienna manuscript adds a lengthy commentary on the text called the Gloss of St. Jerome. It includes quotes of the earlier text glossing, which are useful for reconstructing the text. It also expands on the text, emphasizing prayer, confession, abstinence, the use of a cilice or hair shirt, and instructions for preparing a suitable room. It also includes an incubation ritual, a ritual for guided dreaming. Comparing alpha and beta further, alpha is prepared on brass versus wax. The size is also different. The alpha mandal design features gates, so characteristic of Hindu and Buddhist designs. Alpha uses candles or wands versus candles only in beta. In alpha, 4 different colors are used versus 12 in beta. The spirits are identified in alpha as Jinns and Shayatin versus angels in beta. This table summarizes the 12 altitudes with corresponding zodiac signs, sacred names, angels, and colors. It also illustrates how little of it made it into the Lemegeton. I know this is a busy chart, but it can also be found on esotericarchives.com/Almadel. To very quickly summarize the main techniques involved, the text emphasizes preparations, and especially sanitation and purification, the use of sacred and angel names, guided scrying using incense smoke or a crystal, names, candles, wand, colored garments, and other apparatus akin to lucid dreaming and ancient incubation rituals. Almadel uses various combinations of mastic, frankincense, musk, and others for the 12 altitudes, with mastic as the predominant incense. Given the similarities, it seems likely that John Dee's early scrying experiments in the 1580s used some version of the Almadel for his holy table. I have more details on this in my video and book on John Dee's Mysteriorum Libri Quinque. I can't conclude without referring to a favorite topic of mine, an enormously important and influential figure who's almost unknown today. I'm referring to the 16th century ambassador and Paracelsian scholar, Jacques Gohory, who founded a private occult center near Paris named the Lyceum Philosophal. He's believed to be responsible for a number of influential texts on magic, including Liber Quartus of Pseudo-Agrippa, the Archidoxus of Magic of Pseudo-Paracelsus, the Heptameron, and probably the book Arbatel of Magic. His writings were admired by John Dee, and Gohory's book on the use of noti may have inspired Dee's Monus Hieroglyphica. In his compendium on the De Vita Longa of Paracelsus, he states that he acquired a copy of the Almadel on the death of a very dear friend. Finally, here are a few things that surprised me about the Almadel texts and traditions. First, the amount of cultural interchange or acculturation that's evident, especially in HA1, which shows Hebrew, Greek, and Arabic influences. Second, how fluid the text was as it was adapted by various scribes. Third, the alternate use of banners and wands and candles. Also, the similarity to Indo-Iranian mandala practices, including the 4 gates, the hexagram, banners, and the option to lay out the design on the ground. Also, I was surprised by how much lost material problems and compensations are found in the Lemegeton's Almadel. Thanks for watching and for your support. There's a lot of free content on esotericarchives.com website, including my translation of the F2 text. My books are my main income source, so check those out if you're interested in the history of European beliefs in magic and witchcraft. My publishers have done a great job producing quality books at very reasonable prices. Again, I would appreciate any comments or questions below, and especially welcome would be information on additional manuscripts people may be aware of.